Adjacency policy cards are nerfed, Tier 3 and 4 governments are being reworked, and Mali no longer has a production penalty. Welcome to patch 7.3 of the Better Balanced Game mod. Before we begin, I'd like to clarify that these changes are from the beta version of the mod and are potentially subject to change, so the final version of the patch might end up looking slightly different. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. To start with, let's cover the largest changes of this patch, which are the reworks to various policy cards and tweaks to the Civics tree. All of the early game policy cards that double the adjacency of a district, aside from the one for holy sites, are getting nerfed. For instance, natural philosophy no longer doubles campus adjacency, instead increasing campus adjacency by just 50% and also granting +1 science per city with a campus. Similarly, Town Charters now only grants 50% extra commercial hub adjacency and +2 gold per turn in cities with a commercial hub. These nerfs are huge for civs that get particularly high adjacency districts, such as Japan and Brazil, but fret not, they aren't permanent. Upon reaching the Civil Engineering Civic, the nerfed policy cards will become obsolete and the player will unlock new cards that can once again double their district adjacencies. This means that players are going to be incentivized to generate more culture in the mid-game, as reaching the Civil Engineering Civic is now a huge power spike. One way of doing this may be to take the Pen, Brush, and Voice Golden Age dedication in the medieval era, especially seeing as how the hits to the Commercial Hub and Harbor policy cards are technically an indirect nerf to free inquiry. Changes to the adjacency policy cards aren't the only thing that'll incentivize players to focus more on culture this patch. There are numerous buffs to bonuses unlocked in the mid-game Civics tree. The Military Research card now grants extra science from armories, shipyards, medieval walls, and hangars. The effect of the Wars of Religion policy card is now granted to players passively at the Ideology Civic without needing to slot the card in. Big Ben is now unlocked at the Capitalism Civic rather than at the Economics Technology, and the Tier 3 and 4 governments are being reworked. Getting the short end of the stick is Democracy. The all-important New Deal policy card now requires a wildcard slot rather than an economic one, and the powerful Their Finest Hour policy card, which grants units +5 combat strength in friendly territory, has been deleted from the game entirely. Furthermore, trade routes to allies now grant +4 food and +8 gold, a nerf from the old effect of +4 food and +4 production. Fascism is also getting tweaked. The martial law policy card now cuts war wariness in half and grants enormous amounts of loyalty to cities with garrisoned units. More importantly, however, is the nerf to the combat bonus. Now, fascism only grants +5 combat strength on units while fighting in foreign or neutral territory, meaning its effect no longer helps you to defend your own land. The clear winner of this patch among the Tier 3 governments is communism. Now, it'll grant a legacy effect of +5 combat strength on units when fighting in friendly territory. This government also gains a very powerful new economic policy card, which grants +3 food and production to each campus and industrial zone in your empire. Lastly, communism gains the wildcard policy card, Scientific Vanguard, which grants 10% extra science and production in all cities, but also -2 amenities in all cities. In order for this to be worth it, you need to have enough excess amenities that you can maintain +5 in all cities even with this policy card in, which shouldn't be too difficult after reaching the professional sports civic and building a stadium. Notably, communism is losing the old policy card it had, which granted +4 food and production to all internal trade routes, but fret not. That card is now available to all civs upon unlocking the Ideology Civic, and now takes up an economic policy card slot rather than a wildcard slot. The changes to the Civics tree don't stop there, however. Now, the Rapid Deployment Civic passively grants all units you control the ability to promote an attack in the same turn, which is a pretty massive buff. I cannot stress how big of a deal this is. It's an enormous power spike, comparable in strength to when you unlock the ability to form armies at the Mobilization Civic. Players are really going to want to reach Rapid Deployment if they plan to do some late-game war. The Tier 4 governments are also getting some huge buffs, and should now feel properly rewarding to unlock. Corporate libertarianism now causes commercial hubs to grant 25% extra gold, and grants cities 50% extra production towards units if they have a military district. Furthermore, it grants +5 combat strength on all units, which you can stack with either the Fascist Legacy Policy card or the Communist Legacy Policy card for 5 more combat strength in either foreign or friendly territory respectively. Synthetic Technocracy now grants 10 power to all cities and 50% extra production towards space projects, and furthermore grants 100% extra production towards spaceports in every city that has an industrial zone and a campus. This will allow any player with high science and culture to complete a science victory quickly, even if their production is somewhat lacking. Lastly, Digital Democracy now grants 2 amenities in all cities, and 2 culture and tourism per specialty district in your empire. It also reduces tourism received from other players by 50%, making it extremely powerful both for achieving culture victory and for blocking opponents from achieving it themselves. In practice, I think corporate libertarianism is going to be the go-to government in most games, as the bonus production towards units and the extra combat strength are just too strong to ignore. It was common on the previous patch to see players avoid the tier 4 governments even after unlocking them in order to stay in fascism for the unit production bonus, and now those players will likely just start switching to corporate libertarianism instead. Okay, now that we've covered the civics tree, let's move on to covering the changes to buildings and districts. Amphitheaters now cost less production, going from costing 75 on online speed to just 60. This puts them at the same price point as markets. Previously, it was common for players to build these only when they needed more slots to store great works, but now, amphitheaters are likely worth building a bit sooner. Armories now grant 2 niter per turn, which is a nice change that'll help reduce the impact of RNG. This will mostly be impactful in naval wars, where frigates can drain a player's niter very quickly. Commercial hub adjacencies have been adjusted, now gaining only +1 from rivers and gaining +2 from adjacent city centers. This change likely came about from players complaining that spawning with only lakes for fresh water, with no rivers in sight, was too much of a disadvantage. Now, players who spawn on lakes will still be able to get some decent commercial hubs built out. Research labs now provide 2 less science when powered, but gain +3 science upon reaching the nuclear program civic, a net gain of 1 science per turn. This is yet another change that rewards players who invest more heavily into culture in the mid-game. Seaports are now unlocked earlier, at steam power rather than electricity. They also cost less production than before and now grant the player 2 oil per turn, bringing them in line with military academies. These should see much more use now that they're unlocked earlier in the tech tree. Stables now cost 45 production rather than 60 on online speed, bringing their cost down to match that of a barracks. Since cavalry are generally preferable to melee and anti-cav units, stables are now just better than barracks in the majority of cases. Before we get into covering the changes made to civs, let's go over a couple more small adjustments. Tribal villages can no longer award builders or extra population prior to turn 10. The composites technology requires nuclear fission, and nuclear fusion requires composites. The Manhattan Project and Project Ivy can only be completed in cities with a research lab, and thermonukes cost 100 more production than before. Machine guns now gain a small amount of anti-air strength, and conquered cities start with 75 loyalty rather than 50. Lastly, a few pantheons were adjusted. Earth Goddess no longer provides faith on city center tiles. Fertility rights now additionally provides +2 housing on cities without access to fresh water, and God of Craftsmen now additionally causes improved strategic resources to yield 1 more of their resource per turn. Okay, now that we've covered all of the systemic changes, we can finally take a look at the direct changes made to civs. Saladin Sultan's Apostles now grant +5 combat strength on units within 2 tiles, up from a radius of 1 tile on the previous patch. Saladin Vizier now gains fewer bonus stats upon reaching the Reformed Church Civic, meaning his leader bonus will cap out at +15% science, culture, and faith, rather than +20%. Canada now gains +1 food on pastures and tundra, not enough to make them as good as camps, but enough that it doesn't feel bad to improve sheep anymore. Kin Unifier now gains 2 slots for great works of writing on stables, bringing them in line with barracks. Eleanor now gains +1 great writer point per turn in any city with a market, lighthouse, or temple. This doesn't stack, so a city with both a temple and a market will still only generate 1 great writer point per turn. Still, this is a pretty powerful buff. Cleopatra now generates 6 extra gold per turn on international trade routes, up from 4. Frederick Barbarossa is being reworked. His Hanzas no longer gain a major adjacency bonus from commercial hubs, and his commercial hubs no longer culture bomb surrounding tiles when completed. In exchange, his Hanzas now gain a major adjacency from encampments, and he gains access to a new unique unit, the Tiger 1, that replaces the tank. The Tiger 1 is 3 more combat strength than an ordinary tank, and gains an additional 3 more combat strength when not adjacent to another Tiger 1. Overall, these changes are a nerf to Frederick's abilities in the typically peaceful free-for-all games, but could be interpreted as a buff in teamers, 1v1s, and 2v2s, where he can now commit to an encampment opener and still boast incredible production from his Hansas. Plus, this unique unit is extremely strong. The other German leader, Ludwig, is completely unchanged on this patch, and doesn't gain access to the new unique unit. Pericles is also getting a buff on this patch. Now, his Acropolises grant +2 production for every adjacent wonder, and an additional +1 production for every 2 adjacent districts. While it's a relatively small buff, one must also bear in mind that Pericles is perhaps the biggest benefactor of the various systemic changes on this patch, with the late game Civics tree being stronger than ever and amphitheaters costing less production than before. I expect Pericles to emerge as one of the strongest leaders in free-for-all games on this patch. Tokugawa is getting a fairly impactful nerf, no longer gaining any extra gold from his leader bonuses on internal trade routes. You're gonna feel this one, especially in the later stages of the game. Just like with Germany, Congo is getting some changes to differentiate its 2 leaders. Movember Adnazinga no longer gains 50% extra great merchant points, now gaining 50% extra great general points instead. The extra movement his units receive in woods and rainforest is delayed until unlocking a classical era tech or civic, and woods and rainforest adjacent to his encampments receive +1 production. This is a big buff for this leader's ability to function as an early game warmongerer. Umbande, on the other hand, retains the old bonus of 50% extra great merchant points. Furthermore, her cities within Umbanza now gain 15% extra culture and gold, up from 10% on the previous batch. Olympias is getting a sizable nerf, with her leader bonus now only granting half a point of science per citizen instead of a full point. And now, for one of the biggest changes in this patch, a one-line buff. Mali no longer receives a 15% production malus in all cities. That's it. That's the change. This Civ may have gone from being nearly unpickable to being one of the best in the entire game in one patch, but only time will tell. Mapuche's war bonus has been nerfed, now gaining only 3 combat strength against civs in a golden age rather than 5. In exchange, all cities with an encampment gain +1 appeal on all tiles, which should make it easier to find good spots for the Civ's unique tile improvement. Genghis Khan is being nerfed. Now, he only gains +3 combat strength and the ability to capture enemy cavalry units on his light cavalry, but not on his heavy cavalry. This is a fairly meaningful nerf to his best war timing, as knights plus keshigs are the bread and butter of Mongolian war, and knights are going to be weaker now. Julius Caesar is receiving some changes as well. He no longer gains a bonus amenity in cities with a bath, and the extra experience granted by his leader bonus now only works on melee, siege, and heavy cavalry units. However, all of his units now gain +1 combat strength per promotion they've received, and he gains a new unique unit, the Onager, which replaces the catapult. This unit is able to attack even after moving. Teotihuacan is getting a buff. His extra trade route yields now work on internal trade routes, and his unique governor, Fire is Born, now grants 2 envoys when assigned to a city-state rather than 1. Furthermore, his production bonuses towards commercial hubs and markets are being extended to also function on harbors and lighthouses. Lastly, Zulu now only gains a 5% discount on producing corps and armies directly, massively down from the old bonus of 25%. Overall, this is a pretty huge patch, and I'm excited to play around with the new changes. Personally, I think that these changes mostly reward the way that I already preferred to play in my free-for-all games, with a heavier emphasis on culture than most players. Some of the changes even seem a bit overkill in my opinion. For instance, buffing Pericles and Mbande directly seems a bit unnecessary to me, given that these two are some of the best civs in the game for stacking massive amounts of culture. The buffs to the later stages of the Civics tree are already sufficient for these two to take over free-for-all games on the new patch, and now I fear they may be too strong with the direct buffs. I'm already imagining Pericles reaching the corporate libertarianism government with Fascist Legacy on top for +10 combat strength, and then attacking another player who hasn't even reached a tier 3 government yet. It's a bit spooky. I'll be playing a lot of games on the new patch, streaming the whole process on Twitch and uploading some of the VODs I find interesting here on YouTube. Let me know in the comments what civs or strategies you want to see me try out in the new patch. That's all for now. Herson, signing out.